chapter 16, and we're doing the second part of monopolistic competition. So for this market structure, remember that they're similar but not identical products. Similar but not identical. And so in this market structure, there is an emphasis, a heavy emphasis on advertising to prove to the consumer, or at least convince them that this firm's products and services are different in some way. For a perfectly competitive firm, there's not going to be any benefit, not much of a benefit to advertise because their product is homogeneous. Now, with the Cameron Part2, we see things every so often about promotions and special events that are going to be at the zoo, and people know about it. But here in this, so any firm in any market structure can advertise if they want to, but here we're seeing a lot of it. The emphasis is definitely on advertising in a firm in monopolistic competition. All right, so they want to be able to convince the consumer that their product is different, and that way they'll have more control over the price and hopefully attract even more buyers. All right, we're going to look at different sides of this. So for those who think advertising is a waste of money, that it is maybe not that truthful. So these are people who critique advertising. They might say that, well, ads and commercials, it's more psychological rather than informational. Maybe there's not a difference between different types of toilet paper. Maybe there's not a difference between different types of paper towels. A paper towel is a paper towel, and you're just trying to manipulate people's tastes with that cute little Charmin bear that they have in those commercials, and that it's just psychological. This is just a waste of money and trying to convince people that there's a difference when there's not. And you're fostering brand loyalty, and it makes people less concerned with price differences, and rather they go to the store and they see that brand name or they look for that logo, and that's what they buy. And that's going to impede them from trying another product that might be just as good. So you can see why people who think that advertising is silly, there are reasons for thinking that way. Now, people who think advertising is good, and all of the firms that spend millions of dollars on advertising, they think that it's important because it's providing information to customers. And if customers know about their product, they've heard that name before, they're able to take advantage of price differences. We mentioned, the 4 characteristics of perfect competition last time in our review together, and we mentioned them for the quiz today. Some economics textbooks list a 5th condition, and that's perfect information. So knowing what all the people before you have bought that product for, and that's really easy for us to do. If you have your smartphone, you can just scan the barcode of an item and see if you're getting ripped off at this retailer or not, right? If you could get it cheaper online or somewhere else. You have access to that information, and that fosters competition. And for those who defend advertising, say this helps customers with their information, and they're able to make choices, and this will help them out take advantage of different prices. So it's not only customers who need that information, but new entrants into the industry. They can know what's going on too, about what the going price is for that product, and that would help with their decision to enter or not. And if they do enter, this advertising would help people know that they're here in town, new restaurants here in town, and start to attract some customers. Okay, so there are both sides to advertising. Well, what effect does it have overall? There's a case study in the book on eyeglasses. How many of y'all wear eyeglasses, contacts? All right. Well, if we had advertising or not, they did this study. There were actually different state laws back in the 60s. in terms of whether or not you could advertise glasses or not. We see eye masters commercials all the time on TV, but there were actually states that prohibited it and states that did allow it. And there was actually a difference, 20% difference between the prices of glasses. This is way back in the 60s. So that did and did not prohibit advertising. And for states that did allow it, we saw lower prices overall. So it actually does foster competition. Economists would add to this debate that companies who spend money on advertising and marketing, Michael mentioned how expensive that billboard is right there at 84 and Highway 6. How much do companies spend on commercials during the Super Bowl, just for a slot during the Super Bowl?
Millions for 30 seconds.
Economists say, why in the world would they spend that much money if they didn't have the quality of a product to back it up? They know that they have a quality product. They know if they're able to, capture people, just a captive audience for a few minutes, they would think about Doritos, or they would think about that product. And it's a signal. Those millions of dollars that they're spending on that advertising is a signal about the quality of the product. It could be a silly commercial. That's fine. It's just, economists are saying that signifies to the consumers that this is a brand that's good and it's quality and it's worth trying and you can trust it. So, you all can see both sides. If people are going to be loyal to a brand name, that firms probably spend more advertising to make sure that people recognize that brand name, that logo, and that's really, really important, as you'll know. So if they're able to get people to recognize their brand name, then they can charge higher prices. People who criticize that, though, say it's not even that different. And why are consumers paying more for a brand name item when it's the exact same thing? Well, again, with the advertising, economists would say firms that work that hard to trademark that picture, that logo, they have a reason to do so. And if they're going to spend all that money on trademarking their logo, their brand name, they have an incentive to maintain that high quality of a product. So there is an emphasis, even though there's a debate on whether or not advertising is good or bad, we do see the emphasis of that with firms in this market structure.
So has there actually been any studies done on, because now you've got that customer response. In other words, you look up a product and say PetSmart's got some sort of flea medication for your cat or dog. So when you actually start researching what's best to use, you're not really, you have that added element now of customer response, saying that, yes, I was a PetSmart shopper, but I use a particular product, and I'm giving it 2 stars because, and they give you a reason. So.
Oh, yes. Well, I think economists they are really positive about the more information that consumers have, that's great. And you have to be careful because, if somebody's disgruntled or whatever.
I try to get one that's got a lot of comments, not just 1 or 2, basically.
Right, and if there's just one or 2 comments, you think, well, is this someone who actually works for the company, or is it somebody who's really, unhappy about the product or just didn't use it correctly? But the more information that's out there, when we're sitting here, you all can figure out pretty quickly about what buyers are willing to pay for it. And the more information that you have to make your decision, I think that's better. Okay, one more thing to add in your notes, and this will bring us into the next chapter. I'd like for you to just add this in. We're talking about the different market structures, but how do you know? How do you really know if a company fits into monopolistic competition or oligopoly like we talked about last time? It depends on if those top 4 firms, how much of the market they have. Michael mentioned market share, and we haven't talked about that yet, although some of you mentioned it in your little case study that you did in your groups last time. So what percentage of the sales of the whole market does Microsoft have? And you all said at the time of that article it was about 95%. Yeah, thank you. So that's what we're talking about with market share. Okay, so this is the percentage of total output in the market supplied by the 4 largest firms. Okay, so Marcus was saying Microsoft at the time of that case study being published owned 95% of the market share. So sales in, was it, I don't remember exactly, so let's just say that it was personal computers and software. That means 95% of the sales were, they got it. So we can take a look at the 4 largest firms, for example, breakfast, cereal, Post, Kellogg's, General Mills, I don't remember the other one, but the top 4, if you take a look at all of their sales together, it takes into account about 80%. That's a lot, right? And so these 4 big companies have 80% of the sales, and that means these little guys only have 20% of the sales. And so that's going to look more and more like an oligopolistic firm. If you take the top 4 cigarette makers, they've got almost all of the sales. So you can start selling your own cigarettes and open your own firm, but you know the big guys have captured most of the market already. So if you're looking at some numbers, and we have numbers to look at, the Census Bureau provides this for us. If you're looking at the top 4 firms for another industry, and it's maybe only 30%. That says that these little guys have 70% of the sales total. And so that means there's a more competitive market, right? If the top 4 are really big and have captured 99% of the sales, that looks more and more like an oligopolistic firm, which is what we're going to talk about next time. And there may be just a few other ones, but they don't have very much of the market share at all. So that's what a concentration ratio is. This is what the Department of Justice looks at when a firm, they have a formula, when 2 firms say we want to merge, they'll say, okay, well, what part of the market are you going to have with both of you all combined? Is that going to be okay? Is that going to impede competition? So that plays a role into their decision, and it also helps us quantify exactly where a firm goes.
Is there a certain number that they usually look at to differentiate if it's competitive or oligopolies?
Yeah, about 80% is the cutoff here. So if it was 40%, 50% of the market share that the top 4 firms have, this is probably, it's more competitive, so in monopolistic competition. Most firms, by the way, are in this market structure that we've talked about today. Competition, perfect competition, monopolies, those are, the 2 extremes. Most of them are in monopolistic competition. But any industry where you hear of the top 4, the top 3, think of our automakers in the United States, the top automakers, the top accounting firms. When they've got 80% of the share or more, that looks more and more like oligopoly, which we will talk about next time. And that's the end of this chapter.